Welcome in, Luke. How you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here. How about yourself?
Very good. Trying to stay warm. It's cold down here on the coast, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I think it's cold everywhere right now.
Where are you at today? Where's your location?
I'm actually in Texas right now, and it's pretty cold here. And I know back in Alabama, they've got school shut down so far the
Yeah.
entire week so far. It's already shut down tomorrow. So, uh, the South is struggling to adapt to. I used to live in Minnesota, so it's like I have a hard time being super sympathetic whenever it's like,
Way
a
different.
quarter inch of ice and then the city shut down for a week. But that's where we are.
People here just aren't built for that. I don't think the infrastructure is
No,
either,
I
man.
get it. I mean, when you don't have snow plows, when you don't, you're not used to it. Like it's a different animal. So I mean, people would be dying if it was 120 degrees in Minnesota. So I get it.
Yeah, they shut school down around here for sure. I know last year it froze, but to be honest with you, in all my years of being around this area, I've never seen it this cold. So hopefully it lets up quickly.
Yeah, no, it's been rough. It's certainly not what people are used to, even for it being in January. It's still kind of a different animal than I think what most people are accustomed to. I was watching that Chiefs game the other night, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like I cannot even imagine either being a fan there and trying to sit through this game, or being a player and trying to get hit or hit guy. I mean, just the thought of that, I was just like, oh, I felt pain secondhand just thinking about that.
Shattering helmets, man. That's how cold it
Yeah,
is.
I've never seen that before.
Me either, to
Um,
be honest.
that
Uh,
was nuts.
DeMarcus said it's 15 degrees in Dallas right now. So that's
Yeah,
cold for Texas, too.
he's right. Yeah,
Where we at?
it's not warm. I'll put it that way.
Denzel said 10 in STL. Yeah, Denzel, you got it, man.
Whew,
I'm good. I can't do it.
they're a little more used to that, I feel like.
Oh, for sure. They're made for that climate. But us down here, Texas, the South in general, we're feeling it for sure. But
Yeah.
man, I'm glad you came on again. Like I said, it's good to talk with you. We've interacted on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, for a while now, and I know you've always been on the USFL side of things, a pretty strong component of that media or fan group. So it's
Yeah.
great to hear some of your opinions, your expertise, and just get to know you better.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate you having me on. One of the fun things about this whole merger business has been, there's some people on the XFL side. I follow the XFL, I watch some of the games, but certainly not to the degree that I did the USFL. So, there's some guys out there that I'm aware of, but it's been fun the last couple weeks and months kind of getting that crossover and getting to know more people who cover the leagues on either side and that sort of thing. And certainly it's a privilege for you to have me on here.
Agreed. I appreciate your time, man. I know it. You just did a show last night as well, so I know you're back to back here. So it's a
That's
little
right. Yeah,
taxing.
it makes me feel famous, even if it's not true.
You are famous, man. You're famous amongst the UFL crowd, and that's enough.
Yeah. Well, you got to take what you can get, right?
Yes, sir. That's what we do around here, no doubt.
You got to start
Uh,
somewhere.
let's talk a little bit more about you. Some of my fans, I don't know if they're familiar with you, so I just wanted to ask you a couple questions. I always kind of get people's backgrounds and what they do. So I was just going to ask you, tell me more about you, where you come from, and what got you started in covering the Birmingham Stallions.
Yeah. So I am not originally from Birmingham. I actually am originally from West Virginia and went to college in Minnesota, so that's why I lived there. But I moved to Alabama for graduate school in 2017. And when I moved there, because I was going to grad school, and Birmingham, it's a decent sized city. I mean, you got about 1 million people in the metro area, but it's not massive, right? It's not a Dallas, it's not a New York, it's not a LA. So, and a lot of people who are there, especially at that time, I was in my early to mid 20s. A lot of people were out of college, already had friends, all this kind of thing. So anyway, long way of saying I was new to the city. I was kind of trying to connect with people, just find ways to kind of get plugged in, meet, make friends, all that kind of good stuff. And it takes longer than you would like for it to, right? But I'd been there for about 2 years or a year and a half or so. and this thing called the AAF was kicking off.
Oh yeah.
And, I was like, what's up with this? I'm 31, so I was alive when the XFL came around in 2001, but I was pretty young, and like I kind of knew what it was, or that it was happening, but it was a little scandalous. I don't think my parents were like pushing it on me.
Yep.
And I think it was in the spring, so I was into basketball and baseball and that kind of thing. So all that to say, like I hadn't really followed many of these kind of previous spring football leagues before, and I saw somebody ask about Canton Bulldogs. It's actually Mississippi State Bulldogs. So I don't have any Mississippi State connections other than my father-in-law went there, so I wore this for him. But great historical reference and question there, though, foosball fan. So I so when the AAF kicked off, I was kind of intrigued, right? And I was, I didn't have a lot to do, in the city at the time. Again, like I said, I was still kind of just making friends, that sort of thing. So I was like, well, I'm going to check out these games and see what it's all about, right? And long story short, I went and I just kind of hook, line, and sinker fell in love with it. Obviously, I think most people who follow that league know Luis Perez was our quarterback for the Birmingham Iron, who obviously still a familiar figure to all of us. And so hearing his story about how he like taught himself to play quarterback, watching YouTube videos, the whole spiel, we all know it. I don't need to go through it, but just kind of like, I played football growing up and that sort of thing. And, obviously eventually reached my point where I wasn't able to continue playing anymore, but hearing some of these guys that kind of, either they, just got cut from an NFL roster or they got injured. Otherwise, they probably would be in the NFL. Or again, like a guy like Perez, who just kind of, D3, D2, like came out of nowhere, taught himself how to play. Like there's just kind of these crazy stories. And I was just kind of captivated by, what the opportunity this league, the AAF at the time, was providing these players. And it was just a really great way for me to connect with people in the city, right? Like I would go to the game with some of the friends that I had made, and we met, other people there. And it was just like one of the first times, in Alabama, everybody either loves the Crimson Tide, right? Or the Tigers. That's like what it's all about. Well, I moved there from Minnesota. I was a Big Ten guy. I went to college at Minnesota. So like, I didn't really have a dog in the fight on that front. So everybody, wants to get around and talk, well, what's the latest Bama news? What's the latest Auburn news? And, I didn't really care. I didn't really have connections with either school at the time. So it was hard for me to connect on that level. But once the Iron came around, it was like, hey, here's something that in the city of Birmingham, I can kind of rally around with the community. And so anyway, all that to say, I really fell in love with it. And then, of course, we know what happened with the AAF. And, that was really sad. And then XFL 2020 came around. And I followed that pretty closely, too, because a lot of the players, from the AAF carried over into that league. But unfortunately, Birmingham didn't have a team. And so obviously we know what happened with that league too. So then in 2022, when the USFL announced that they were coming back, and it was kind of rumored that they were going to have the whole league based in Birmingham, where I was living, and have a Birmingham team and everything. I was, as soon as I heard that, I was like refreshing Reddit and Twitter and everything, like every day trying to get the latest news. Cause I was, already all in. And then, fast forward 2 years later, obviously here we are now. Been fortunate enough that the USFL stuck around a couple of years. Obviously the XFL came back, and it's been a fun time to be a spring football fan in Birmingham, because obviously the success that the Stallions have had. So they've been a very easy team to sort of fall in love with. And, the first year in 2022, I was really just a fan. So I followed the league very closely. I was in some like Discord threads, these sorts of things, like keeping up with the team, talking to people about the team. Thought about maybe doing some of the things like I'm doing now, but I was just like, I don't know, do I have the time for that? But the second year, this past season, I talked to my wife about it. I wanted to get her blessing, and she was like, honestly, you spend so much time reading about it and looking into it anyway, like you might as well put that time to good use and share it with somebody else. So kind of started doing it, and, had enough fun with it. And I guess, people appreciated some of the things I was doing enough to make me feel like it wasn't a complete waste of time. So just kind of stuck with it. And then, all the changes and everything that's happened over the past year, that kind of gets us up to today.
Hey, that's a pretty good story, man. It gives me more information for sure. To be honest, I didn't know much about you until we started interacting on Twitter. And, I Googled you, of course. I saw that you did some prior shows last year. What was the name of those shows? I cannot remember. I don't want to get it wrong. Was it the USFL? Yes. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yep. So last year, there's a good friend of mine named Angelo, who ran an account called USFL Today, and I would do kind of a weekly show with him. We would do it together and stream it on YouTube and stuff. And then we actually were also broadcast on a Fox Sports radio station in New Jersey. So he set that all up. He made that all happen. He does a really great job. He was really covering the New Jersey Generals because that's where he's from. And but he kind of was kind enough to bring me into that. And so I did that weekly last year. And then, I do guest appearances here or there on other shows, or other people would ask me and stuff like that. But yeah, that was kind of the main thing I was doing, like, on a regular basis last year.
Understood. So coming in now, so last year you were media. Did you go to any games as media? Did you attend any?
Yeah, I did. Cool. So I was in Birmingham at all of their home games. I'm trying to think. The first season there was like 1 or 2 games I missed because I had a prior engagement. But I think this past season I was like made sure to clear my schedule. So I think I was at every game, and I would go back and forth. So I had a media pass at the games. But sometimes I also just like to be a fan. So some games I was on the field, most or all the game, kind of tweeting, covering the goings on of the game. Other games, sometimes I'd kind of split like 50-50, like go on the field for a quarter, come up and hang out with some friends, and sit in the bleachers and cheer and stuff like that for a quarter. Sometimes I would, not a lot, but sometimes I'd go up in the press sort of booth, and hang out up there. And, but it's quiet in there. Like, if something good happens, you can't cheer. So it's like, I've got to totally take off the fan cap. So I do that for a little bit, but, didn't always want to do that for the whole game. So, and then I actually was fortunate enough that I got to travel to a couple of away games. So actually by the end, most people probably know this, but the USFL last year only played at 4 cities. And actually by the end of the year, I got to go to all 4. So Memphis isn't a far drive from Birmingham. It's like 3.5 hours. And actually my wife's from there. So that was an easy one to kind of check off the list. So I actually caught 2 games there. And then I actually, just so happened that when we played Michigan, I had some time off from work and stuff like that, and was able to find a relatively cheap flight up there. So I went up there for the weekend. I'd never been to Detroit, so I was just like, it's a place I've always kind of wanted to go. This gives me a reason to go. Why not? So, and it was an NFL stadium I'd never been to, because they played at Ford Field. I was able to get a media pass to be down on the field and kind of cover that one on the field, which was really neat because obviously there wasn't as many Birmingham people there. There was a few that made the trip up, but not as many. So that was great. And then I went to Canton for the championship, and so I got to be on the field a little bit for that. And I'm from West Virginia, like I said, so not far from Canton, a couple hours. So my family came up to watch that game with me. So I was kind of, again, back and forth between the bleachers and the field. But yeah, I was been fortunate this past year to kind of have the luxury of kind of getting the experience from all those different angles.
Yeah. I can attest that once you see it from that angle, it's very different than the fan angle. But
for sure,
it's like you said, though, it's kind of hard to take that hat off sometimes. I've always been a raging football fan myself, and this past year when I started doing things, it was a change of pace for sure.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, in Houston, it got pretty lively in that box sometimes. Not gonna lie.
Oh, I don't doubt that. I mean, people in Texas love their football, so
Yes, sir, they do.
So they're not always very stoic about it.
No, sir, they're not. Well, that's a pretty good backstory, man. I got to know you a lot more. Now, coming in last year, you were not part of Pro Football Newsroom, correct?
Last year I was.
You were? Okay.
Mostly what I did with them last year was kind of write articles for their website.
Gotcha.
Related to the Stallions. So like I would do recaps of games, previews of games, player signings, stuff like that. I didn't do a lot of I wasn't on their podcast or some of the other things they do as much. They have a show we do each year to kick off the season. They call it Spring Stock. And, I was on that. So a few things here and there, but mostly what I did was write articles, and then I would, tweet and stuff, in my, I guess, exceeding amounts of spare time that I have to tweet a lot.
I mean, you're very active on Twitter. That's where I first saw you.
Yeah. Probably too active.
That's what you said before we were recording.
Yeah, I've been on there, I guess probably for about a year or so, because I didn't the first year when the USFL was around, I was just a fan, so I would I like kind of would read people's tweets and stuff, but I didn't really tweet myself or anything. But then about a year ago or so, I started like tweeting regularly myself, and when I look at like the number of tweets I've had since like the past 365 days, it's a little concerning. But yeah,
Hey, I
here we
look
are.
forward to your stuff, man. I'm not gonna lie. There's some people in here that just chasing clout. I know a lot of the stuff you put on Twitter is informative and tells you about a subject. You're not trying to stir controversy. So that's why I respect you, and I'll have you on the show anytime just from seeing the work you do on that social media platform.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a ton of respect for guys that try to cover the league pretty broadly, because what really my sort of niche is the Stallions, and obviously I learn a lot about other teams by covering them, but at the end of the day, that's really what I'm interested in, and what I try to provide the most information possible that I can about them. And so most of the things I put out there are things that I either learn about the team, or sort of analysis or news that I've uncovered or been able to share, all that kind of stuff. So so try to make it, if you're not a huge Stallions fan, well, I don't know, you might still like following me, I guess, to get intel on your opposition or something like that. But I try to make it so that if you are a Stallions fan or interested in the Stallions, that it's kind of if there's something important to know out there, I try to either share it if somebody else puts it out there, or be the first one to kind of update people on what's going on.
I see TJ Barnes commented. He said USFL biased.
Yeah. He's giving me a hard time because PFN ran a power ranking story today, and the Stallions were number one, which I didn't write the article, just to clarify, but I did agree with it. But yeah, he was giving me a hard time about the bias on that one. So we'll see what happens on the field. TJ's from Alabama, so I was pushing hard to try and get him to come play for Birmingham. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. DC was fortunate to get a good one, but we'll see what happens.
Had a question real quick, and then we'll move on. This is from Brahma Babe. She said, "How is the female fan base of the USFL? Do you feel there is a good representation?"
Good question. I think with I guess it's hard for me to speak probably for the USFL as a whole. I mean, I can try, but it's I can speak better for like the Birmingham Stallions.
Just from your observation, it doesn't have to be anything concise or that you're standing on.
I would say I think the female fan base is I would say I think it's good. I think it could be better. I think that's one of the great things about the XFL, because Danny Garcia is such a prominent face of the league. I think that obviously makes it a very sort of welcoming and hospitable like opportunity for women who either are interested in football or want to get more interested in football to, be able to kind of have that point of connection with the league. The USFL obviously hasn't had something like that. I know at least in the South, like especially in places like Birmingham or Memphis, that hosted their actual teams in their cities. I thought there was a pretty equal number of male female fans that you would see at the games, and lots of, I know at least especially for Birmingham, I can tell you I'm friends with several female fans that travel to away games, that are posting about the team online, that are very invested. I mean, I think in the South especially, football is kind of a way of life. So in the same way that I have lots of female friends who are dyed in the wool Crimson Tide fans and Auburn fans or whatever, they're also feel the same way about the Stallions and really cover the team closely and go to all the games and know who the coach is, know who the players are, like all that kind of stuff. So I know for us, like with PFN, Pro Football Newsroom, we have like one female correspondent who's up in Michigan, and she kind of helps cover the team up there, and as a season ticket holder goes to the games, and so we've been able to get her. We started a new show with kind of the core group of us, kind of an around the horn type show where we all just give our opinions on what's going on, and she's on there. So it's been good to have a female perspective with her kind of joining us. So I mean, all that to say, like I guess I certainly don't think the female fan base is weak or non-existent. Obviously, football, I think historically and even today, tends to generally be a male kind of dominated endeavor, especially when you talk about people like doing what we're doing right now, that sort of thing. But I mean, if you go to a tailgate, if you go to a game, if you look at people engaging in social media about the teams and all that kind of stuff, I think you would see a good number of women who are interested and invested in their teams and in the league. And, hopefully that's something that will continue to grow with this merger.
Understood. Yeah, good answer. Good answer. Just wanted to ask that quick question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
She's really trying to lead the front on getting some women fan support, and I know they're out there, so we just want to actually highlight that, and ask.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's move on a little bit, and you can be 100% honest here, okay? I want to hear what you think. And what do you think about the merger so far? Well, just an opinion.
Yeah, so I think I would say my honest opinion is probably like bittersweet. I think let me start with the positives, and then I'll maybe go to some of the disappointing things. I mean, I think the positive things, right? I'm not going to have anything like super original to say, but I mean, I do think the positive thing is the potential for longevity and sustainability, right? I mean, I think we all kind of had these conversations before 2023 when the USFL and XFL both kicked off, kind of head to head for the first time. It was like, realistically, how long can both of these things last, right? Like, it's been so hard for one league to last. Like, how is it going to be possible for two to last? So I think we all kind of knew that there was probably an expiration date on that, like two competing leagues, whether one folded, whether they merged. I think it happened sooner than I expected it to, but I think the good news with that is it gives them, I think, a better shot at being able to make it long term, right? Which is what I think we all want. Birmingham, just to speak for the city, has had a string of teams from different leagues come and go, right? We had a team when the CFL expanded into America. We obviously had an XFL team in 2021. We had the original Stallions with the original USFL. We had the Birmingham Iron with the AAF. They also had other things like the Birmingham Fire or with the World League of Football. There was the Birmingham Americans, like the Vulcan, like there's like all these teams, right? Like Birmingham's kind of one of these cities that's always been in spring football. So I think and I think one of the things that was kind of sad about the USFL from year one to year two in Birmingham was that I think the fan base, like there was a really strong core fan base, but I don't think there was a lot of growth from year one to year two, or at least not like massive growth, right? Like that we maybe kind of hoped there would be after like a second year. And I think honestly, part of that was just people were like, oh, wait, that actually thing's like still around. You know what I mean? Like I think people just assumed from the jump that it was like probably going to be like a one and done thing. Like people didn't get invested because they didn't even anticipate it would be back for a second year. So I think kind of that setting up for long-term success. Obviously, I think when you've got Fox, Redbird, The Rock, Danny Garcia, like all of these people coming behind this thing. It's like, if this doesn't work, I don't know if it ever can. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. You've got obviously 8 markets that have had boots on the ground for at least 1 to 2 years. Fan bases that have been built up for, whether it was XFL 2020 and 2023 going into kind of almost a third year, or, USFL for the past 2 years kind of going into a third year. So, so I think obviously that's exciting to me. I think, and everything that comes with that, right? So like having ESPN, ABC, Fox, like in some ways I thought, I think we all kind of felt like, for those of us who followed it, XFL 2020 was really kind of had a lot of potential, right? To, it was getting great ratings. They had this really nice, on ramp to sort of do things the right way. There was a lot of exciting innovations and rules. Like, it really had so much potential. And then obviously, with COVID and everything, it didn't work out. But I feel like this new merge league, the UFL, it's going to be similar to that in a lot of ways, just in terms of the quality of play, in coaching, the fan support, the media representation from ABC plus Fox, Disney plus Fox. So I think with all of that, that's a lot to be excited about with the merger. I mean, I think the thing that makes it bittersweet, right? And again, this isn't anything anybody hasn't said, but I mean, I think, just speaking for myself, I think if you had told me that this merger was going to happen this year and that we were going to come out on the other side with only 8 teams, I think I would have been pretty surprised. I think I would have thought there'll at least be 10, right? Or at least be 12. So I think, that is a bummer. Obviously, again, getting back to the good thing I said about sustainability and longevity, like I understand why the league maybe made that decision. But that being said, still, it is kind of disappointing to lose so many, markets, so many teams. it's a little bit of an easier pill to swallow on the USFL side because, with the hubs, like there were some teams that weren't even in their home markets yet. So like, it's still a bummer, but it's not, I don't think there's as many hard feelings. But there are still I know lots of people that like I just talked about earlier. My friend Angelo, who covered the Generals, did a really great job doing that for the past 2 years. Lives in New Jersey. Like he was waiting for the day he could go to a New Jersey Generals game in New Jersey, and like that's not happening, at least not anytime
that
soon.
sucks, man.
Yeah, so I mean, like that's a big bummer, and I think obviously from the player standpoint, just seeing all the guys that are now out of work, thinking about all the guys that are going to get cut from rosters in the next couple months once camp starts, like that's obviously also a hard pill to swallow. Coaches, staff, I mean, we could go on and on. So
Yes,
I mean, so all that to say, I think the merger is exciting. We're entering sort of a new era of spring football. I do think the merger also, one of the things that really excites me is I do think it gives a new level of hopefully a new level of sort of credibility and legitimacy to non-spring football fans and followers. Because I think once they kind of know, like, hey, there's just one league, and the Rock's behind it, ESPN's behind it, Fox is behind it. Oh, some of these USFL players I knew are in it. Oh, some of these XFL players. Like, I'm hoping that will sort of help everybody, people that have kind of followed and supported leagues in the past, as well as maybe people who haven't, to really rally behind it. And I think all of that's really exciting. It's just, again, it's kind of you got to take the good and the bad with it, in the sense that you're gaining all that, but you're also giving up a lot of opportunities for a lot of fans, players, coaches, staff, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'm fortunate that, the team that I like and follow and have invested a lot of my time and energy into is sticking around. Right. So, personally for me, it's like, I don't have to, like, it could be a lot worse. Right. But I feel for those guys that, either the team they covered is now folded, or, the team that they played for is now folded, or, coached for. So all that to say, I mean, I think in the long run, it's going to be a good thing for the prospect of spring football in America. It's just, obviously, you're going to have to go through some pain to kind of get there, which is not fun.
Growing pains is what I like to call them.
Yeah.
You're going to have to knock some things out and loosen some things up, and just take the hits as they come. Like you said, though, the biggest thing and the most important thing that a lot of people are remembering is like the loss of jobs, loss of players, loss of coaches, loss of teams. That's what the problem is right now. I wouldn't say the merger itself is having issues. There's things that aren't. I would do things different personally, but I don't feel like things are going bad. So
right,
we'll see what happens. And I bet you are blessed that you still have your team.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the nice thing too, I mean, I didn't mention this, but I think you were kind of hinting at it. Like, I think both these leagues had strengths and weaknesses. And obviously I'm more acquainted with the strengths and weaknesses of the USFL because that's kind of what I followed more closely. But I know, just to speak for the USFL, right? Like, I think there's things they did really well, and I think there's things that they could do better, and that the XFL did better. And so one of the things I'm looking forward to is I'm really hoping that when these two come together, you'll really, Lord willing, you'll get kind of the best of both worlds, right? Hopefully not the worst of both worlds, but the best of both worlds. And that some of the things that the XFL was really strong at will carry over into the new league, and vice versa for the USFL. And I think in a lot of ways you have the potential for a superior product really on all fronts, whether that be marketing the teams, the actual quality of play, just the stream of information, right? Like that was sometimes I think a frustrating thing for the USFL, maybe at times for the XFL, I'm not sure, but sometimes it was like you were waiting on information, right? And I'm hoping that with this merger, once, obviously there's a lot of moving parts right now, but I think moving forward it's just going to hopefully get better and become more kind of consistent and clear, what's going on, and that, I think that's all going to obviously help the fans and everybody who follows these leagues and all that kind of stuff.
Agreed. I mean, we feel very similar in what you say. I really don't have to. I've said my opinion on here like 1,000 times, but I'll tell you what I'm excited about most of all is that Fox production style. I've seen they've already started doing some articles on the UFL. I almost said XFL, the UFL, and I'm really excited about that. I think that's going to really amp everything up. That it's just beautiful the way they do things on there. Sometimes I'm a fan of Fox Sports, so
yeah, I mean, I think to have Fox and ABC/ESPN together, I mean, that's kind of a dream team. Fox was kind of paired up with NBC for the USFL for the past 2 years, and that was great in a lot of ways. The downside was NBC didn't have obviously the same degree of investment or commitment to it that Fox did. So I never felt like you got quite the same level of sort of like cross promotion and things like that you did from Fox. I mean, they did some things, but I felt like they always could have done a little bit more. And obviously, to not really have your league mentioned much on ESPN, that's where people generally go for sports. So that doesn't help either, right? So I think to be able to sort of have Fox and ESPN both behind, what this new league is going to be. I mean, again, kind of like going back to what I was saying earlier, like if this doesn't work, I don't know what will, because I mean, that's going to maximize your viewership. That's going to maximize sort of the professionalism with the production and the broadcast. People obviously that's where they're used to going for sports, is either ABC/ESPN or Fox, Fox Sports. So I think, kind of like it was with XFL in 2020, I think it'll be really fun to kind of see how that comes together this season.
Agreed. And I'm hopeful for it all. I just want success personally. My Houston Roughnecks are going to look a little different in terms of the coaches and players, but it's pretty good that they didn't get cut either. And with that, it's important to note that both of these leagues or whoever's in charge is listening to the fans. They're actually taking some of the fan opinions and using that to make their product better. So
yeah,
I'm excited about that aspect as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, guys, you're asking questions. I'm just starring them, and I will ask it. We'll talk about the questions at the end, okay? Because we've already been on here 38 minutes, and I'm trying to make it under 2 hours tonight. We'll see what happens. But yeah, if you do ask a question, guys, I'll highlight it and then I'll ask towards the end. No problem. All right. So today, we had the super draft Monday. Yep. And honestly, I didn't get to review as much as I wanted, but the beauty of it is we had a lot of the results yesterday. We got to see who was where and who picked up who in what place. And they did a lot better with this super draft than they did with the dispersal draft, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as getting information out there, I was really thankful that we kind of got it the day of and didn't have to sit around for 3 days wondering who's going where.
Yep. It's a good thing that they did that, and I'm hopeful that the same thing rolls into the season where we have information Sunday, Monday, plenty of material to pump out some content and actually provide some adequate data instead of just he said, she said.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we move on fully, I want to ask you, so being media with the USFL, I mean, did you have access to everything you needed in that? Could you see data? Could you see pictures? Could you see everything that you would maybe need to see in that place?
Yeah, so I would say they did a good job with providing information, especially at the games. They didn't always, I think, do a good job getting information out there, like digitally, like if you weren't physically present at the game. So like, for example, something they changed, they started doing better at it. But at the beginning of the year, you could never get a depth chart, right? Like an official depth chart. But if you went to a game and you were like a media person at a game, and you went up to the press booth, there was actually like nice printed depth charts there.
Yep.
And so it was like, wait, like it's really nice to have these here physically at the game, covering the game, but like, why aren't these also being shared to like people online or like, or not even necessarily to fans, but like at least to people that are trying to cover these teams online, but maybe can't physically be there, or trying to cover, maybe you live in Birmingham, but you're trying to cover a game, up in Michigan or something like that. So thankfully at the end of the season, like the last 4 or 5 weeks, they started, putting those online each week. And so I think they were kind of taking good steps to continue to do that. But at least as far as at the games, they were great about like they had printed depth charts. They had like a printed preview, before you got to the game of like, here's kind of some things to watch for today. Here's like, the team's records coming in and all this kind of stuff. And like maybe some quotes, during the games, they would have somebody come around after each quarter and hand out like a stat sheet of like, here's the stats from the game. So that was all like very professionally done and great. And there's a lot of access to kind of information and stuff that you might need that way. And they did a good job emailing us and letting us know when, hey, here's this this local event. These players are going to be going to, this toy drive, or whatever, like, some community outreach thing. And if you want to stop by, there'll be time for media. So I think all of that was done well. I think it's just, and I'm not like, this isn't my full-time gig, so I don't always know like what's, normal, right? It's like, I don't like cover the NFL as my like normal job. So, but I think sometimes it's like, like I think I was saying at the beginning, like if you didn't physically go to the games or have some of those connections, I could see where it would be kind of maybe difficult to access some of that information. And I think, like I said, towards the end of the year, I think they were trying to kind of quote unquote democratize that a little bit more and get a little bit more of that information out there. But I was always impressed by, like, on game day, the way things were handled. I think with the USFL, I think some of the pushback was always just, I think in terms of the digital presence and the social media presence and some of those things, people wish there was a little bit more, that was kind of put out there. Sometimes I felt like it was kind of maybe the sort of bare minimum, but I will say the nice thing was, I think from year 1 to year 2, there was improvement, right? So I think
good deal.
They were listening to fans, listening to media people, making changes, getting it to try and be more and more and more professional. And I think, I assume that's only going to continue as we move into like, this new sort of entity.
Yeah. Very similar in my experience with the XFL. I will say almost exact from what you just described, which I'm sure that's the norm amongst media. I didn't really have any complaints on my end. It's just that, there were a few times where you'd walk in and you get that depth chart and so would be injured and you're not sure why because they just practiced yesterday. But nothing major ever occurred on my end to complain about. Honestly, I had a good time at those games and I was plugged in. But like you said, if you didn't really do this and you didn't really go do some legwork, hustle to get in there, you kind of got left out. Which I guess that's how it works as well.
Yeah, and I think one thing, if I could, I'm sure, The Rock's not listening to this, but if he is, if I could put a plug in for something, I think one of the things that I had a lot of people like DM me about on X or Twitter or, reach out to me about last year was like, going back to what I was talking about earlier, was like depth charts because of fantasy, right? Like they wanted to do DraftKings or something like that. And they're like, I don't follow this league super closely, or I don't follow all 8 teams super closely. So like, is this person even going to play for the Stallions today? And people would ask me that. And, sometimes I would know. And sometimes I'll be like, honestly, I'm not sure. Like, cause sometimes week by week, like you just didn't really know, maybe at like the third wide receiver or something. It was just like, well, it might be this guy, it might be that guy. And so I do think one of the things I'd really like to see the league lean into moving forward is more like fantasy opportunities, whether that be having some kind of, fantasy football league through ESPN or whatever it may be, or at the bare minimum, having a better kind of stream of information for fans that want to do fantasy, whether again, DraftKings or whatever it may be, because I do think there is a segment of the football population or world out there, right, that maybe isn't like super keen on spring football, but they're not against it. But like what they like is like, they really enjoy fantasy. They really enjoy betting. They really enjoy those aspects of the game. And it gives them an opportunity to do that in the spring on football, which they don't otherwise have. And I think that'd be a way to really kind of get people sort of, brought in who might otherwise sort of be on the fringes and get them to know who players are, right? Like, because again, it's like, it's the same thing with me. Like I follow the NFL, but I'm a Vikings fan. I don't know every single player on every single team. And, sometimes the players that I know well, like if they're not, play for the Vikings or, a team in the NFC North or something like that, it's like, oh, I know that guy well because I know he's a beast at fantasy. So like, I know what's going on with him. Right. So I think, that would be a really easy way, I think, for the league to make kind of what they're doing more accessible and attractive to at least a segment of sort of the American populace. And again, part of that is just, I know people that weren't interested or didn't want to do fantasy for it or whatever, because again, they couldn't get information. And it was just like, well, I'm not going to bet if I don't even know who the running back for this team's going to be. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I do think that's something again, the USFL, I think, did better with that as the year went on, but I think that's something that I'd really like to see them do with this new merged league personally.
Agreed. 100%. At least make that data available. So even now, like I've tried to look up some of these players that we're going to talk about, and it's hard to find that source of data. I mean, I don't want to use Wikipedia. I don't really trust that. So there's a couple other sources that these people do this themselves and put the data in. But man, it'd be so cool just to Google that and see some stats for everybody throughout the whole year on each of these leagues.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
played some daily fantasy last year with the USFL, trying to get more involved so I could, because I wanted to watch, and I figured that would make me get more involved. But man, it just pissed me off, to be honest, because there'd be guys that I didn't know were playing or what the hell was going on most of the time. I think I did that the first 2 or 3 games last year. Just nothing crazy, just a few daily fantasy bets. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I think that stuff is especially important at the beginning of the year because I don't know for the XFL if it was this way. My assumption that it was, considering I followed some of these other leagues, but like I think especially at the beginning of the year with these teams, a lot of them are kind of figuring out their roster still, right? Like camp's not super long.
Yep.
Like it wasn't uncommon in the XFL or the USFL for week 1 to week 2 or week 2 to week 3 for there to be a quarterback change, right? Like, hey, we're gonna give this guy a shot, right? Or hey, in week 1 this guy carried the ball 20 times, but in week 2 this guy had an injury in camp and he's really the guy we think, so we're gonna start him. This, you know what I mean? So I think especially at the beginning of the year you had a lot of changes in the rosters and in depth charts, like a lot more so than you would in, let's say, like the NFL. Like usually in the NFL with preseason, with camp, it's like by the time week 1 starts, we know who the quarterback's going to be, right? Like Aaron Rodgers left Green Bay, but we knew Jordan Love was going to be the quarterback like week 1 Green Bay, right? Like there's not really surprises there as much. But with these leagues, a lot of times you really don't know. I mean, maybe by the middle of the season to the end of the season, again, it starts to kind of maybe settle out and you kind of know who the guys are. But like, especially at the beginning of the year, it's very in flux. And
Yep.
so if people are going to do daily fantasy or be part of like a fantasy league, that kind of like information, the depth charts, the rosters, like stats is really, crucial if you want to, just like you said, not just be frustrated and be like, well, what's the point of even doing this? Like if I'm just kind of just, shooting in the wind. So I think, I feel pretty confident that the league's going to do a better job with that this year, but I would really like to see them make that a priority, moving forward.
Understood. Now I'll tell you, man, that we've talked about a lot of things on the show that somebody hears it at some point. Now I won't say they watched the show.
Sure.
I know we've talked about a lot of subjects where a couple days later we hear some developments, and I don't know if it's just happenstance or an accident, but it's definitely happened a few times. So if you are listening, that I believe that's important too, and even for the betting aspect,
Right.
people are going to bet more if they're confident in what they're betting in. And you have some people that will always bet spreads or money lines or whatever, but most people that are really into it, they want to know what's going on, and that's what the NFL does best. Is it keeps you plugged in the off season and keeps you plugged in the in season, and you don't have much to guess on except game strategies and such.
Right. Yeah, it's I always go back and forth on this, right? Because I think you don't necessarily want to just do everything on the league level for like the fan that you're trying to convince to be interested in the league, right? Like you want to take care of the fans that are really committed and like do care about the product. But I think you've got to always have that person in the back of your mind of like that person who maybe is like casually interested, is open to giving it a shot. And I think especially with this merger, with the new name, with the new image, with the new mixture of teams, like all that, like it's an opportunity to really bring new people in. And so I think just little things like that maybe don't seem like always like a big deal, but could be an easy, quick like turn off to someone or make somebody feel like, oh, this is kind of bush league. Like why would I care about this, right? Like the odds are already kind of stacked against you, right? Like a lot of people go into it skeptical and thinking like this is not going to be legit. And so as much as you can, I think, kind of present in a way that's very sort of professional and gives people the impression that like, oh, this is like a legit league. They got their stuff together. I think that helps. And I think that's part of why the XFL in 2020 was really successful. They had that 2-year on-ramp, which was a long time to wait. But the nice thing was like they weren't just throwing stuff together last minute haphazardly.
Nope.
Like they really had their ducks in a row.
Yeah.
And I think that really, helped people to kind of immediately kind of have a little bit more excitement or faith or trust or whatever in the process, because it was like, oh, there's like legitimate people backing this and running this. And there's a lot of thought clearly being put into it in all aspects. So I'm hoping we sort of get that kind of impression. I think we will, but I'm hopeful that we get that sort of impression with the UFL.
Understood. Yeah, I feel good now. I was a little worried about the media stuff. That's why I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
personally. What to expect basically from that USFL side, because I'm hoping to make some Memphis games this year and a few other
Uh-huh.
places. Last year I was strictly in Houston except for the championship, so
Sure.
hoping to visit some other places in the whole scheme of things. But we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah.
Well, let's get on this super draft, man. And
Yeah.
I'm what I basically wanted to do today is you pick your top 5 and I'll pick my top 5, and we're going to discuss these guys a little more and just get a little bit more in-depth understanding of the value, why they were picked early, or just their stats alone. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, for sure.
I've got 5 that I've collected, and I know you did as well. So if you want to go ahead and kick it off, I'm going to sit in the background and try to pull up some stuff online, try to give something to look at while you speak. But yeah, I'm curious to see where you come from, because I know you're a lot more of a USFL guy, whereas I'm a lot more of an XFL guy. We're meeting in the middle, very good, but you know your athletes better than I know your
Sure.
athletes, and I know my athletes better than you know my athletes for the most part, I'm sure.
Right.
So curious to see where you stand in all this, and I look forward to hearing you 5, man.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead. First one, I'm gonna give a Stallions pickup. I'm just gonna do one, so I'm just gonna get it out of the way, and then the other players I got with other teams. But um, you know, I got to give a shout out to my guy Ryan Langan. He's actually the Stallions long snapper, so this will be his 3rd year with the team, and he was actually awarded all USFL long snapper in 2023. In 2022, they had an all USFL team, but they didn't have a long snapper award. In 2023, they did, and so I was we were all excited, that he was going to be back for a 3rd year after winning the award, but the Stallions actually didn't protect him with their 42 players. So there was the chance, the risk that somebody else might pick him up, right? I know there's a few teams that needed a long snapper, and obviously he's a good one. So I was a little worried that he was going to get nabbed by somebody else, but I think it was in like the 5th round or something like that. We were able to pick him back up, and so great player,
There's Ryan
guy
right
that's kind of
here.
been a yep pick
Round
40,
5,
yeah.
pick
So
40.
yeah, so great player, great for the culture. He was all USFL last year, as was our punter. They'll both be back in 2023. So, and long snappers they don't get enough love and attention. So I had to give him a shout out. The Stallions brought back a lot of guys, but long snapper was the one position that we like really needed someone. Like we legitimately didn't have any other player that could do that. Whereas every other position is like the guys that we brought back that we weren't previously able to protect were more kind of depth guys or second string guys or that sort of thing. So that would be one. A second one, I'm going to kind of cheat and kind of make 2 and 1 here, but a second one would be Boogie Roberts is kind of one of those guys that's sort of been like the face of the USFL or a
For
face
sure.
of the USFL for the last 2 years. He played for the Pittsburgh Maulers for 2 years. Last year, they were based in Canton, and he appeared on this show called I think it's called Cleveland Sports Show, like weekly. He's been in Peloton commercials. Like he's just a hilarious guy, great personality. And he was picked up by DC. It was later in the draft. Like I don't
That's what
remember
I'm looking
exactly which
for.
round. It might have been like round 9 or 10. It was kind of like surprisingly oh, there it is, round 9. Yeah, pick 70. So I was honestly surprised that he was able to sort of still be available at that point. Because he was a really fantastic player. I saw a lot of improvement in him from 2022 to 2023. And he's one of those guys, it's not just about what he brings to the field, but it's also about what he brings to the locker room, the culture. So I thought that was a great addition. And kind of, along with that, they also, we mentioned him earlier, but TJ Barnes, they were able to grab him in the 3rd
Yep.
round. So to add TJ Barnes and Boogie Roberts to your defensive interior, that's a huge win, I think, for a team. So I really liked what DC did, especially with those 2 picks. And those are two great guys. So you got to be happy about adding them
And they're
to
ready
the
to
team.
play too. That you
Oh
can
yeah,
see them on social media. They're fired up for the season.
yeah, absolutely. I think TJ, he's definitely got a little fire lit under him after getting not protected by Arlington, despite being at least according to Pro Football Focus like their number one graded player last year, and a big part of that defense that was, really what helped them in a lot of ways get to the championship. So I know he's ready to go, and Boogie too. I mean, he went to San Antonio, decided to sort of leave the quote unquote USFL side and go to San Antonio, and then wasn't protected. And all of a sudden it's like you didn't know if he was going to be playing in this league. And so I know he's got a little chip on his shoulder as well. So yeah, those two guys I think are going to be a big part of the DC defense. If I was going to speculate about how things are going to go.
And I've got more pieces to add to that when I get to it as well. So we are definitely in agreement there that defense is going to be lights out.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another one that I was going to mention, and again, I'm going to kind of cheat and sort of roll two into one here, but
Go ahead.
Willie Henry, he actually ended up being the last pick of the draft. I don't know if that like quote unquote makes him Mr. Irrelevant or whatever, whatever they call the last pick of the NFL draft, but he's actually a former Birmingham Stallion and played at Michigan. Really fantastic defensive tackle, spent some time in the NFL with the Ravens, maybe another team or two. But he's been with the team for the last 2 years, won 2 championships with the Stallions. I'm not exactly sure why, but for whatever reason, the Stallions chose not to protect him and sort of let him walk. I thought maybe they would pick him back up in this draft, but they didn't, for whatever reason. And, credit to the Showboats for coming in there at the end, when things were kind of wrapping up, most of the teams were done, and getting that kind of final sort of piece of the puzzle. They've got I think a really Memphis, for those that didn't follow USFL, Memphis, had a decent team last year. They started off really poorly. Week 2, they got beat by the Birmingham 42-2. It was embarrassing. And, it was kind of like everybody kind of thought they might be like the laughing stock of the league. And then they hit a stretch in the middle of the season where like they put a new quarterback in, Cole Kelly. They kind of got some things figured out, and they went on a 5-game win streak and ended up finishing the season 5-5, and just missing out on the playoffs. But they had a lot of good pieces and a lot to sort of build on. And they added a lot of good players in the first kind of phase 1 USFL dispersal, draft period. Sure. And then they added a lot more here. And I thought, Willie Henry in a lot of ways kind of the cherry on top for what they were able to do. And if I'm going to mention him, I also just, again, kind of 2 and 1 here. I also have to mention Christian McFarland. I think he was their 3rd round pick. He was also previously with the Stallions. He's with the Stallions for the past 2 years. Plays safety, played strong safety for us. Was our starter for the last 2 years. Again, a kind of another situation where, for whatever reason, I'm not in the war room, so to speak, with Coach Skip Holtz and our general manager Zach Potter. I don't know what all kind of goes into some of these decisions, but for whatever reason, they decided it was time to either move on from him, or at least at the minimum, they didn't protect him. And before they could get him back, the Showboats kind of swooped in and stole him. And so he's, if you go back and look over the last 2 years for the Birmingham Stallions, he is the leading tackler for the team since the USFL came back in 2022. So,
gotcha.
Yeah. So, I mean, a great player, not huge safety, but, maybe a slightly undersized, but really plays really tough, kind of hard-nosed guy. He can cover. In the 2022 USFL championship, he had the game sort of ceiling interception. So, so yeah, again, another guy, just kind of a little bit of a head scratcher. Surprised to see him walk, but for whatever reason, the Stallions have just decided that they're going to kind of, sort of overhaul their secondary. That's been pretty clear from what they've done this offseason. So, but those two guys, that was another one that stuck out to me. Another one I'll mention that's actually not sort of USFL connected, but the Defenders, another pick of theirs, they took CJ Johnson, who's a wide receiver from ECU. And I could be wrong about this. I was kind of trying to do some research before this draft was coming up about, the some of the XFL guys. But if I remember correctly, CJ Johnson was actually, I think, selected by the Defenders in their rookie draft, and then they weren't able to protect him, but they picked him back up.
Gotcha.
In this draft. But, he was a great player. I'm a little bit familiar with the American Conference, just because, UAB is now in the American, and some other schools and teams that I follow are in the American Conference. And CJ Johnson played for ECU, who's in the American, and he was a really great receiver. He was like All-American, first or second team his senior year, had over 1,000 yards. I think his freshman year, he was like freshman All-American, team for the conference. And he's kind of one of those guys that's like, kind of those group of 5 guys that doesn't have the name recognition of maybe some like, big Power 5 school like, Alabama, Michigan, USC or something like that, but was really a key piece of the ECU offense. And, I've seen some of those guys go on and be really successful in these kinds of leagues. And so that was a kind of a rookie pick that they were able to retain that, I liked, because that was one of the things I was wondering was like, what's going to happen with some of these rookie guys, right? Like, I know the XFL, they had their rookie draft, the USFL they had their rookie draft. But when you're kind of trimming things down, it's like, who do you keep, right? Do you keep maybe a guy that's a little more veteran? Do you keep a guy that's maybe younger, but at least has a year or two of experience in these leagues or in the NFL? Or do you give a rookie a shot, And so he was one of the names of just a few rookies that I was kind of keeping my eye on. And so I was excited to see that, he was one of those guys that sort of made it through. And then the fifth guy I'll mention, this is actually a guy, he's like a crossover guy. So he was in the USFL in 2022, and then he went to the XFL in 2023.
Oh, I think I know who you're talking about.
He didn't have the same level of success in the XFL as I thought he might, that he did in the USFL, but Will Likely, who was a cornerback for the San Antonio Brahmas he was with the Houston Roughnecks, I think.
Yeah, there you
Roughnecks go. In 2023. And then he was with the Houston Gamblers in the USFL in 2022. And in 2022, he was an all USFL player, one of the best cornerbacks in the league. And he didn't get protected. And the Showboats, actually, again, to mention the Showboats, they picked him up, I think in round 7, looks like it was. And so that was another one. Again, some of the positions I'm mentioning, I'm a little bit more familiar with the guys because cornerback was a position that the Stallions, kind of needed to bolster. And so I kind of looked over before the draft who are maybe some guys they might go for. And he was a guy that was really on my radar because I knew what he was able to do in the USFL in 2022. And I think he did decent in the XFL in 2023, but didn't have quite the same year. And I think fell through the cracks a little bit. Like I said, didn't get protected with the coaching shifts and everything with the Roughnecks in San Antonio and the Gamblers becoming the Roughnecks and all that. But he's a guy that can play. There's no doubt he can play. And so I thought that was another, again, kind of one of those guys, kind of like Boogie Roberts, right? That like sort of went under the radar a little bit, kind of fell in the draft, was on the cusp of maybe not landing on a team after one of these drafts, but, a team kind of swooped in there at the end and picked him up. And so there's lots of other, I think good picks and guys worth mentioning, but those were a handful of guys kind of all over the place, different rounds that, I had my eye on and kind of stuck out to me and I thought were good picks when they were made.
Hey, those are great picks. And to be honest with you, most of mine are coming from the first round,
Yeah.
It's hard to not follow the guys that that I know, because it was mostly Roughnecks, and looking through right. When I started it was like 2 or 3 Roughnecks. And I'm like, okay, this isn't going to work. I got to shift this down a little bit. So I get it. And I appreciate your takes because you really know what's going on that end of things in terms of your Stallions and such. Is there anybody else that you want to discuss? I mean, just while you got the air?
Well, I don't want to steal your thunder. I know you said yes to the first round picks, but I mean, I definitely thought there were some good first round picks too. I mean, I'll let you expand maybe more on some of these because I'm guessing these are some of the ones you want to mention. But I mean, I thought Dormindy's a great pick from what I saw of him in the XFL. Yep. I like the McClendon pick a lot, not only because I think he's a good player, but I think the fit with the system in DC, I think is really smart.
100%.
Yeah, Nate Brooks, he played cornerback for the Stallions. And,
that's my second. So my first was Jalen. let's hit Jalen real quick. I think you're gonna pick him out as well. So yeah, Jalen was my first in terms of what I like to see. I know DC was really wondering what was happening with quarterback, which that's kind of common with a few of our teams right now. Nobody really knows. But with that being said, I think he can run this offense if it's geared somewhat like it was last year. I wouldn't say he's like a De'Aaron King, but he's very close, and I think he can really, really do something with productive coaching, and that's my opinion. But yeah, so he was a former LA Wildcat back in 2020. I didn't know that until I started researching. He started 4 games last year for the Vipers. He had 112 attempts with 67 completions, with a total of 873 yards, with 5 touchdowns and 1 interception. So it was a little rough there in Vegas. I don't know if you watched it too much last year, but they were definitely trying to find their identity first off, and then once Perez left, things really changed for that team.
Yeah.
But I think his place in DC is fantastic. And from my opinion, and looking at this should be their guy, unless Te'amu comes back. Who knows?
Yeah, that's I think the thing that everybody wants to know, right? Is what are his plans? And obviously, if he comes back, he's you got to assume going to be the one that they kind of roll with unless something changes. But I think if he doesn't, obviously, I think this is a great sort of plan A or plan B, however you want to look at it, because of what he's kind of, the flashes that he showed last year. I caught a few Vegas games, and like you said, they were a little rough to watch, but he definitely was sort of like a silver lining for them, I thought. And so I knew he was going to land somewhere. And I think for him, he's got to be happy because I think this is kind of like the best case scenario for him. If he could, pick a team where he was going to go.
Mm-hmm.
He was honestly a guy like I kind of wanted the Stallions to grab. Like we've got a quarterback, J.M.R. Smith, who was our quarterback in 2022, was injured in 2023. But, even with him, I was just like, just to have another guy in the room, I think he would have fit well in what the Stallions do. So he was a guy I had my eye on. But I think he'll do really well in DC.
Yeah, I see that being a good relationship for him there. Now, my second was Nate Brooks, another first-round pick. He went fifth. He's now a Michigan Panther. He was a former Birmingham Stallion, so I know you know all about him. He started 10 games last year, 29 solo tackles. He ended up signing with the 49ers, but then dropping back down and then coming back to hang out in spring football land. So anything you want to add on him, please do.
Well, no, I mean, I love Nate. Nate's a great player. Again, it's kind of another like head scratcher of like, I'm not exactly sure why the Stallions let him walk, or if the hope was like, well, we're not able to protect. Obviously, you can only protect 42 guys, and the Stallions had really had been very aggressive in the offseason with free agency, kind of like adding guys. So I know that you had to make some tough decisions, right? Like, do we bring back guys that we, know like are known entities, right? We know what they can do, or do we maybe take a risk on some guys that we added in free agency that we think have a lot of potential, but we don't necessarily know how it's going to pan out? Like that with the cornerback spot was kind of one of those spots for the Stallions. So I was really shocked. Like I would have never guessed that they weren't going to protect Nate, but they didn't. Maybe they would have liked to try and grab him, but they didn't even get the opportunity because he was a top 5 pick. But yeah, he was a huge piece for us last year. In 2022, our starting quarterbacks were Brian Allen, who was back in 2023, and then a guy named Tay Hayes, who ended up going to the NFL and has been on practice squads and things kind of since that 2022 season. And so Brooks kind of stepped in and took Hayes' spot. And, I thought was one of, if not our best kind of secondary players last year. He had a couple key interceptions. Like we played the Stars. He had a game-sealing interception against them. We played the Showboats. Wasn't a game-sealing interception, but it was kind of like a very tide-turning sort of interception. Yeah. And he's a great tackler. He's physical. He's just a great player. Michigan got a really good one with him. He's one of those ones that I'm really bummed to see go, but I'm glad he's getting another opportunity at least, and I think they'll be very pleased to have him on the team.
Agreed. So moving on, next up I have Jared Thomas. So he was picked second by Memphis, and you can see why with the quarterback they have, Case Cookus.
Yeah.
This was a solid move by them, and I researched him some. He was 2022 all-offensive team for the New Orleans Breakers with the USFL. It said he was picked up in a supplemental draft by the Seattle Sea Dragons back for the XFL, in 2023. But I couldn't find any actual game stats or video, so I wasn't sure if he actually played there or not. I was a little confusing on that note. But he's 6'4", 310, 27 years old. He's a big man, and he's going to be blocking for these Showboats. So that's a solid pick, and I feel like that's really putting them forward in making this offense solid in the future for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're spot on with the Case Cookus thing, because when he was playing for Philadelphia, the dude was just running for his life all the time. And, Memphis's head coach now is John DeFilippo, who's coming over from New Orleans with, a team that got folded. And so, he's got a familiarity with some of these guys that are coming from the Breakers or have been in the Breaker system, and they'll be kind of easy guys to be able to kind of plug into this new team and what he wants to do with them. So, I think it's a good pick for them with what they're trying to do to sort of kind of bring together the old and the new. But obviously, I think if you follow these leagues, one of the things is you can never have enough good offensive linemen. I mean, that's kind of true at any any sort of level, right? But that's definitely true in these spring leagues, right? Like the more offensive linemen, good offensive linemen you got, the merrier. So you can never go wrong there.
Yep, seasoned all the way around, so they can move these guys around if someone gets hurt. You have leaders on the field. We saw, at least I saw personally, what the XFL had whenever the linemen were not playing up to par. You could really, really see it, and you can see it in a lot of player stats that were on these teams with worse offensive lines. So that to me, I really like that pick, and I'm not a Memphis Showboats fan, but I think I'm almost am. Like I'm this close.
Yeah, I get that. They've really done a great job this offseason loading up their roster for sure. And they've got a great fan base. Like they actually weren't in the USFL in 2022, it was the Tampa Bay Bandits. And then so they've only been around for 1 year, but people at Memphis is kind of like Birmingham, right? Like they have always had like a team in these leagues. And people in Memphis really love Memphis and really support Memphis things. And like the local media is really behind the team, and they don't have the same like fan base and city size that like St. Louis does. But I think as far as like the appreciation for the team at the city level and like the backing of the local media and like investment from the city, they've got kind of something special going on there. So I like what they're doing. Like I said, my wife's from Memphis, so I guess I'm a little bit partial. I'm not totally partial because they're kind of a sort of kind of a rival for the Stallions, but I think it's great that they're in the league, and I think they're really doing some good things there.
Yes, sir. I'll tell you, that's what you started with the Birmingham Iron, with AAF, the Express, the Memphis Express is really what got me into all this from the start. Liberty Bowl Stadium is a great place, and I've got some really fantastic memories from those games, man. Johnny Manziel coming out and getting knocked out. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff. But one thing's for sure, the fans there loved that team back then. So I know when they start having success, you should see a big outpour of fans, especially because the weather's going to be nice there. It's not going to be cold anymore.
Right.
February, March, it's still kind of chilly over in Memphis, but once April hits, you should be good going forward.
Yeah,
all right.
Absolutely.
Next up, I have the first round, first pick, Quentin Dormady. The Brahmas, I feel like, could definitely use him, but I think the question is still in the air of who's going to be quarterback there. We saw a lot of splashes of great play from him, and he wasn't very consistent, but was that due to coaching? Was that due to offensive line? Was that just who knows? But he didn't have a bad year, and you could definitely see how he connected with Cody Latimer going forward, like later in the year. He played 7 games. He started 4. He had 205 attempts and 140 completions. So 140 pass completions out of those 205. He ended with a total of 1,507 passing yards, 10 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. He was sacked 20 times last season. His highlight, I say, and what really got him on my radar is when they beat the DC Defenders. They knocked him off that undefeated streak, closed out the game with some nice defense, and that team really became solid right there, and I grew to respect them a lot more. But the question here is was that bad coaching? Was that bad play, or was it just something else that we weren't familiar with? My Brahmas fans, I'm sure they got some comments for this, and I'm curious what they think of who's going to be better. But the biggest thing there in Brahma land is get that offensive line right, so that we don't see the same thing as last year. Because last year it was bad. It was nasty up front. There was a lot of things going on that no quarterback can be successful in, no doubt. So hopefully whoever is going to hold the reins to this team really can steer them to where they need to be.
Yeah, I thought it was a great pick. Dormady was one of those guys. I was kind of shocked he was even in this draft. Like I thought somebody would pick him up at that sort of dispersal draft stage, just because we saw obviously Orlando wasn't the most consistent team last year, but we definitely got glimpses of what he was capable of, and there was clearly a difference when he came in and sort of the life and the energy he brought to the team and the offense. So I was pretty shocked that he made it through to this point, but I wasn't shocked when he went as the first pick. Excuse me. And I think, um, San Antonio, I think, was one of those teams kind of going into this draft that there were some question marks at the quarterback spot. Was Jack Cohn really the answer or not? Obviously, I think he's got potential, but they struggled at times last year. And like you said, was that entirely his fault? Did he have, the time and the system to really be able to maximize his potential? Hard to say. But I think at a minimum, if I was a San Antonio fan, I'd be nervous to have gone into the season without having added another quarterback. And I think if you're going to add another quarterback, Dormandy, obviously his name had to be up there for the guys that you might want in the room. I think in some ways, in terms of his style of play and things like that, he does remind me in somewhat of Brandon Silvers, who was with Wade Phillips last year with the Roughnecks. And obviously they chose not to bring Silvers down to San Antonio, but I think
surprised me, honestly.
Yeah, that was kind of what I thought was maybe going to happen, was they were just going to pick Silvers back up, bring him back down to San Antonio. But I think, Dormandy is kind of a similar type player, and I think he could have success in sort of the air raid system that they run, in a similar way that we saw Brandon Silvers had success last year. I don't know. Dormandy's another one of those guys. It's like, I would have been happy for him to be on my team just because, again, in a non-ideal situation, you saw what he was capable of last year. So I think, if I had to guess, I think he'll be the day one starter for them going into the season. Could be wrong about that. You never really, I guess, know. But I think he's got a high ceiling, a lot of potential.
I agree, and I don't know. I'm not sure 100%. But did AJ Smith return with Wade to that Brahma?
I think so. Yeah, that's my understanding.
So yeah, you should see some things from Dormandy this year. I mean,
for sure.
That seeing it that, I mean, if not, they're going to find somebody that can. I know that.
Yeah, no doubt.
All right, my last pick, Drayvon ask. Can you say this correctly? Because I always screw
things up. Askew Henry.
Askew Henry. All right,
yep.
Drayvon Askew Henry. He is now a St. Louis Battlehawk. He was a New Jersey General, and prior to that, he was a New York Guardian. Didn't know that till I looked it up. Also. He played 10 games last year. He started 2, total of 25 solo tackles. Looking into this guy, he had a lot of stints with some NFL teams between 19 and 20, 2019, 2020, and ended up back in the league, the spring leagues. But another interesting fact I found about him was cousin by marriage is Darrelle Revis, and they trained together.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't know that either. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and how he's kind of roved around to different teams and gotten those spots. Do you know more about him?
Well, I do actually, because before he played for the Guardians, there might have been something in between there, but at least in college, he actually played for West Virginia, which is originally where I'm from. And so I actually like this pick because Anthony Becht, St. Louis' coach, actually played at West Virginia too. So I don't know if Becht was familiar with his game because of that, or if that is just kind of a coincidence. But that was one of the things that I really liked. They're sort of two Mountaineers. They both played for West Virginia, and I don't know if it's true, but I at least like to think that was part of like what brought them together. But Drayvon Askew Henry, when he was at West Virginia, was a great player for them. Was a really good defensive player in college, and then he's kind of bounced around some of these leagues, and was a good player for the New Jersey Generals. They had some really good secondary players over the last 2 years. They had another safety named Paris Ford, who was kind of one of those guys that didn't get picked up, that I'm kind of shocked didn't, just because I know he's a great player, and I've heard a lot of other players from the SFL talk about how good of a player he is. And then they also had DJ Daniel, who was all USFL this past year, and a few other guys I'm forgetting. So the Generals were kind of known, I think, for having a pretty stout secondary, and Askew Henry was part of that for sure. And so I think he'll be a good fit in St. Louis, and definitely probably compete to see a good bit of playing time there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So those are my 5, and I really tried not to pick from the first round list, but I feel like every one of these guys here are going to have a lot of impact on their teams. I honestly do. They may not start, but you're going to see them, you're going to hear them, and we're going to have some experience with them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think that's totally right. I mean, obviously, some of these guys that went in the first round, like there's a reason they went in the first round, right? Like, they were guys that were early off the board because they're guys that started last year for other teams, guys that are well known, guys that were successful in either league. And so, I think what'll be interesting, and this, to come back to a guy that I mentioned earlier, I think what'll be interesting is to see how some of these guys fit in with their new teams, right? Because again, you can have a guy who maybe was a stud in 2022 or 2023 in one team and one system, but that doesn't always translate, right? Like Will Likely, who I brought up earlier, it's not that he was a bad player or anything like that last year for the Roughnecks, but like, he just didn't have quite the same success that he did with the Gamblers. And, I didn't follow the XFL and follow the Roughnecks closely enough to be able to, diagnose why that was compared to the year he had with the Gamblers in 2022, because you all had other guys like Donald Payne, who was an all USFL linebacker in 2022 for the Gamblers, same team, who then went to the Renegades and had that same level of success, right? It was like a key piece of their really good defense. It was like a leading tackler in both leagues, both years, and he'll probably be a leading tackler again this year in the UFL.
Sure.
So I think, I think it'll be interesting to see with some of these guys, like just to take, like a Dormandy or McClellan, right? Like they weren't in great situations last year, not very ideal situations. They're in a new place, new team, new offensive coordinator this year. Do we see them really kind of flourish and thrive and become even, take their game to even a different level? Or do they end up getting beat out by somebody else? Do they struggle? It's just like, it's sometimes hard to say. So I think, again, some of these guys, these first round guys, like there's no shock that they were some of the earliest guys off the board. But it'll be interesting to see when you've got this consolidation that's happening and there's a limited number of spots on a depth chart, who sort of, rises to the top and is able to really kind of solidify, their place in this new, even, doubly competitive league. It's just, it'll be hard. We can make predictions, but there's going to be some surprises for sure.
Yep. You're going to have guys that probably never heard of come through and just shine, because that's the way spring football works sometimes. You have your studs, but you have a lot of the lower level guys that they're hungry and they got some fire and they're ready to show out. And I feel like that happens and very commonly. Rick 8-Bit said, look at Luis Perez, started for Vegas, then won a championship with Arlington. That's 100% correct. I'm confident he could probably go anywhere with the right coaching staff and be successful. 100%.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, after watching him with the Birmingham Iron and then with the New Jersey Generals in 2022, and they had the best regular season. I mean, well, them and the Stallions were tied for the best regular season record. And unfortunately, they lost in the playoffs. But I mean, he was super successful that year there. If the AAF had lasted, like his team would have been in the playoffs. Like the Iron would have been in the playoffs. Now, obviously, who knows if they would have won it all or whatever. But and then obviously he went to Arlington and we saw what happened in Arlington. So like he's a guy who he's basically been in the postseason or the championship every season that he's been in one of these leagues. And I think that obviously is in part because of his play, but I think it's also in part because of, just his leadership, his maturity, the way he makes everybody else around him better, protects the football, that kind of stuff. But like you said, when he was in Vegas, like if he'd stayed in Vegas, they probably wouldn't have made the playoffs, right? And that wouldn't have really totally been his fault. But that's just not really a system in a team in a situation where he was probably going to thrive. And Arlington wasn't necessarily like a walk in the park, right? It's not like they were like, 7-0 and then they added him and went on to win the championship, right? Like, I mean, it still wasn't a super ideal situation. There were some things they had to work out there, but once they worked them out, obviously we saw what happened. So I do think there's talent, right? But then there's also team dynamics and culture and kind of scheme and fit and coaching and you can't just look at a roster or look at an individual player and just think about the talent. And, that's all, that's not all it takes. I mean, there's a lot more to it than just that for sure.
Yeah. Mike said, do you think any of these guys put it out that they had a preferred team? And that's another factor that we don't know. What kind of communication has been going on behind the back burner? How many of these free agents right now already have a spot and we just don't know it because they're not official?
Right.
And that's you can see that's got to be happening with a couple of these teams just from the picks and how they're missing crucial spots. And they didn't pick up in these picks. There's a lot of guys left right now that did not get picked up. I could name 5 or 6 different names easily. And that are skilled, like you just said, Brandon Silvers, Jeff Badette. We can go
Mm-hmm.
off and on. I think I had a tweet up here too from somebody, but
Yeah, I know like Terrence Plummer was one of the bright spots for the Guardians last year. Didn't get picked up. I'm trying to there's the USFL guys I mentioned too, but even like XFL guys like there's a lot of names that you recognize on that list. Like Reggie Corbin was probably the most electric running back in the USFL for the last 2 years, and I have no idea why he's not on a team. Like I don't know if he got blackballed, like if he made somebody mad, like if he told them like I don't want to play in this league anymore. Like I have no idea.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And there's other names on here. It's the same way. I mean, where is Saul right now? Does anybody know where he's at? Is he
He's one
was
of
a
those guys.
stud.
I think that he's a free agent, so he has kind of the ability to sort of pick and choose where he wants to go. So my guess is that he's probably been in conversations with a team or teams that he's interested in going and playing for, and he'll get to kind of pick where he goes. But as of now, I mean, we don't know. Like he hasn't, he hasn't landed anywhere yet. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, agreed 100% on that. I think we'll know more come next week for sure. I'm hoping the schedule drops this week at some point. I know that was a rumor going around, but it'd
Yeah,
be
I saw
real
that.
nice to get it.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw, but I know at Pro Football Newsroom we put out an article. I think today it was today or yesterday, but somebody found that for I can't remember if it was like for like a tailgating pass or like a parking pass or something, but they put it out there for the Battle Hawks. So I think that gives me like there's it's kind of one of those when there's smoke there's fire, right? Like there's been some rumors that we might get a schedule this week. At least it seems like St. Louis kind of knows which dates they're going to be playing in St. Louis. So I would be shocked if we don't hear something this week. If not this week, next week at the latest. Just because obviously they want to sell tickets, and you're going to have an easier time selling tickets when people know how they can plan for the upcoming spring games and all that kind of stuff. So I think we'll hopefully hear something soon on that front.
Agreed. All right, let's roll into some questions, and I'll let you hop off after, man. I appreciate you sitting on here for an hour
absolutely.
and a half. It's been a good conversation, very productive.
For sure.
All right. All right, here's one from DeMarcus. This is when we first started. Is the Stallions fandom holding consistent, or do you think there may have been a bit of novelty following?
I would say I think it is holding consistent. I do think year one, there were some changes from year one to year two. There was like a little bit of sticker shock. So like year one, they were just like everything was based in Birmingham. They were really just trying to do anything to drum up interest. So like tickets were like $10 a piece. Kids got in free, like under 12 or something like that. It was just kind of like there was really no excuse not to go. And it was new, there was like all those kinds of factors. And for whatever reason, the first year, 2022, we had more games either at night or like at a time that was just a little bit more conducive. 2023, the scheduling was a little tougher for us. Like most of our games were on like a Saturday afternoon, which like a Saturday afternoon in Birmingham, there was a couple games where like it was pretty brutal just in terms of the heat and the sun beating down on you. And there was like one or two games too where there was like the Talladega 500 was going on or something like that, where we had some other things that we had to kind of compete with. But there were some changes, like you had to pay for kids in year two that were like not under the age of like 4 or 3 or something like that. So that made it a little bit harder, I think, on like families that maybe wanted to come. There was, I think in general, maybe ticket prices went up a little bit in year two. I think, like I said earlier, there was kind of that skepticism that like people like didn't necessarily know or expect it to be back in year two. I do think the league also could have just done a better job, like marketing and promoting the team year round. Cause it was like everything happened in 2022 and then you didn't hear anything about the Stallions. And then like a month before the kickoff, it was like, oh, hey, we're back. Here's some billboards around town. But like, it was kind of too late at that point. I think there was probably too many casual fans or whatever who like maybe were on the fence about, is this thing really coming back or whatever. So all that to say, I mean, I think like the attendance, the support, like pretty much I would say like kind of stayed steady. I think there was disappointment from the league that it didn't really grow from year one to year two, because I think there was a hope that like, oh, if the Stallions won the championship, they're coming back for a second season. Like based on all those factors, we'll see like a big jump. And there wasn't really a big jump for whatever reason, maybe several of the things I mentioned and maybe some things I haven't, but I think I think there's what I would say about Birmingham is I think there's a really solid like core of Stallions fans. Like there's probably 10 to 15,000 people that will show up every home game, like no questions asked, right? And I think the challenge right now is just sort of like building on that core. Like I don't think you're going to see that shrink. I don't think you're going to see them go away. Like I think people are there's a good group of people in Birmingham that are like bought in on the Stallions. It's just kind of getting those more like in the same way when you talk about kind of the league as a whole, right? Like kind of getting those people that are maybe on the fence or they're more interested in college football or, you know, they have a lake house or whatever they want to go to in the spring on the weekend or whatever, like trying to get some more of those fans kind of bought in. And I think the everything that's happening and the way that the league is, you know, trying to do more to market the teams and promote ticket sales and just do all those kinds of things, I think are going to help for sure. But, you know, we'll see. I think, yeah, year 2 was a disappointment, not so much because there was a drop off, but because there just wasn't as much growth, I think, as we all kind of maybe hoped there would be. But, you know, I think I'm cautiously optimistic with the Stallions being kind of 2-time champs now with the, you know, merger happening with some of the familiar faces coming back and new player signings and things like that, that you'll just continue to see kind of some steady growth in Birmingham and obviously hopefully other cities as well.
Good deal. Good deal. Yeah, because, you know, next year it's going to matter. So I hope those fans this year, I'm saying next year, it feels like next year, those fans really need to show up.
For sure.
We don't want personally, I don't want any team to look bad. And we know from sitting here right now that you're not going to mess with the St. Louis numbers. Their fans are going to probably be the biggest, the loudest, and just the most, the biggest fans of their team. So hopefully they do show up and show out a little bit. And like I was telling you earlier, I hope I do get to attend a game over that way this year. I have not yet. So I really, really am going to try. It's only a few hours for me, like 2 or 3. So definitely going to shoot that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm hopeful that like some of the new bantering and rivalry will also like help
I think
with
it will.
Just the growth of the league. Cause I know like on the USFL side, I think the Stallions fans, at least the ones that are really like committed, do feel sort of like this obligation maybe isn't the right word, but kind of this responsibility for like being the biggest, most vocal, kind of most like, you know, crazy fan base on the USFL side. Because Memphis, I mean, as far as like numbers, like Memphis honestly might have had the most people at their games last year, but obviously they've only been around 1 year and their team hasn't had the same level of success that Birmingham has. So they've got like a good kind of like group kind of growing there, but I wouldn't say it's not as organized and as you know, as passionate maybe as some of the fans in Birmingham, since we've had kind of 2 years and you know, 2 championships and all that kind of stuff. So I think people in Birmingham do kind of feel this like you know, desire to demonstrate to the USFL that we're like still top dogs, right? And still like the biggest, loudest, best fan base. And I think now there's going to be like a growing rivalry, and probably especially with St. Louis, but then, you know, with the rest of the XFL teams to show that like, yeah, you know, we know that the USFL had hubs and like all that kind of stuff, but you know, you can't sort of dog on Birmingham. Like at a minimum, like Birmingham has a fan base that in terms of, you know, attendance and passion and, you know, traveling to road games and all this kind of stuff that we have something going that rivals to it to some extent, you know, what some of these other teams in the XFL have been able to do, which has been awesome to see. So I'm hopeful that little bit of that kind of competition, the league kind of leans into that, and hopefully that kind of encourages, you know, teams to really kind of show out and support their city and the teams that they, you know, play there.
Brahma,
I do think I know. I saw you. Yeah, sounds like St. Louis and San Antonio. I mean, I think there are some similarities because I've seen videos, you know, of like the people dressing up at the St. Louis games and at the Brahma's games, and I think you've got something similar. Like we have a group of people at the Stallions games. They call themselves the Horsemen, and it's kind of a supporter section, and they're on their feet the whole game, going crazy. They've got like the fake like horse heads on,
gotcha, that's cool.
You know, like going nuts and stuff like that, and they'll travel to away games. You know, I know a group of them are already buying hotels and planning for the opening weekend in Arlington, that initial game, that kickoff game. So I think with Birmingham, you have that like really kind of good core like you do with some of these other XFL teams too. And I'm excited to see kind of how, bringing all that together. I mean, I think that, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, like one of the nice things about this merge league is like you're basically getting like the 8 strongest markets, right, in terms of support from teams, right? Like on the USFL side, Birmingham, Memphis, and Michigan were the 3 teams that were really like in their cities and kind of on the ground there. And then you take Houston and sort of put them in Houston and kind of build on what the Roughnecks were doing. And then you keep markets like DC and St. Louis and San Antonio and Arlington. I mean, in terms of like attendance and support and passion, again, kind of like if you don't get it from these 8 teams,
you're not going to.
Well, it's not like we wouldn't have got it from the other options we had. Yeah. I'm afraid. So I'm hopeful on that front.
Understood. Let's do 2 more questions. Here's a good one. This is your department too. Jay said, "Hey guys, who do you see being the starter QB, Adrian Martinez or Jamar Smith for the Stallions? Smith did lead the Stallions to the championship in 2022. Which one would be your preference?" I'm gonna let you take that, Luke.
Yeah, that's a tough question. So, I would say I see Jamar being the starter week 1, and I would say that he's my preference just because like I know what the guy can do. He's a great quarterback. He led us to the championship in 2022. He beat out Alex Magoo for the starting job in 2023 to begin the year. Obviously, if you follow the USFL, you know kind of what happened with him getting injured and Magoo coming in and end up being the league MVP. But, I think it's Jamar's job to lose, so to speak. Now, obviously, I think Martinez has a ton of potential, just both from watching his college film and kind of knowing what he can do and how he could maybe fit into what Skip Holtz likes to do with his offense in Birmingham. And I think that he's got a lot of upside and potential because when the Stallions released their protected roster, there was 4 quarterbacks on the roster at the time: Jamar, Adrian Martinez, and then a guy named Jalen Morton, who kind of served as Alex Magoo's backup all of last year after Jamar got hurt, and who Skip Holtz and a lot of players on the team spoke very highly of. And he spent some time in the CFL and some other places, put up really impressive numbers at Prairie View A&M in Texas. And then the 4th guy was Kyle Sloter, who, was all USFL in 2022, obviously kind of struggled with Arlington in 2023, but is obviously a great quarterback and like a well-known player in these kind of spaces. And they only chose to protect 2 of those guys. One was Jamar, obviously, and the other was Martinez. And they let Morton and Sloter go unprotected. Now, they were able to get Morton back, but they didn't keep Sloter, obviously. And but the fact that they wanted to keep Martinez and make sure that they didn't lose him, I think goes to show that they think they got something there in him. And so what I would say is going back to 2022, in 2022, Alex Magoo was the starter at the beginning of the year and Jamar was the backup. And as Mike pointed out, Jamar played for Skip in college. So a lot of the reason they brought Jamar in, I think, was not necessarily, it's not that they didn't think he was talented. He's obviously talented, but I think a part of it was, hey, we like this Alex Magoo kid and what we think he can do. Let's bring out Jamar in as the backup because he knows the system. He's been in the system all throughout college. Like he gives us kind of a sure option. And when Alex went down in year 1 in 2022, Jamar stepped in and really kind of put the league on notice of what he was capable of. And then when Alex kind of got healthy, what you kind of saw was Jamar was kind of still the starter, but Skip never really gave up on Alex. Like he would find ways to get him in the game, whether it was like kind of a specific package or, he even put him in at wide receiver at one point, just trying to get him the ball because he knew what he could do with his legs. Like it was kind of weird, but it was clear that they wanted to kind of use both of them in some capacity. And I wouldn't be surprised to kind of go back to the original question. I wouldn't be surprised to see Jamar be the starter throughout the year, but I don't think that means that you never see Martinez. I think there's some packages, there's some plays, there's some formations that they find ways to get him on the field because of what he can do with his legs. And Jamar's, somewhat mobile too, but not to the extent that Martinez is. Martinez is kind of like Alex Magoo in that way, and like probably even more so can do things with his legs than Alex could. And so I think my guess is that Martinez is kind of probably seen as potentially eventually going to maybe be sort of the guy in Birmingham, assuming he doesn't end up in the NFL or something like that. But I think for the time being, it's Jamar's job to lose. But I do think you see not necessarily like a 2 quarterback system, but I think, kind of like maybe DC did with like De'Aaron King, where they like got him, in with his legs at points last year, kind of to change a pace with Tamu, or, some other teams like the Roughnecks. I know they had Brandon Silvers, then was it Cole McDonald, who, sometimes they would kind of, they were maybe more of a sort of a 2 quarterback kind of system. But I do think all that to say, I think Jamar is the starter, but I think you see some of Martinez, and especially as the year goes on and as he gets maybe more comfortable in the system, you might see more and more of him. And then, of course, there's always injuries, and you just never know what's going to happen. So long way of saying I think it's Jamar's team. I think Jamar's the guy. I think he's the starter, but I think certainly Martinez is sort of waiting in the wings, so to speak.
Understood. Good answer, because I could have never broke that down that much. You can tell you really know your subject matter, man. Seriously.
Yeah. Fortunately, Jamar's been there kind of since day one, so he's one of those guys I can talk a lot about because there's a lot of memories and stories and history there with 2 full seasons kind of behind us.
Yeah, and going back and researching, he hits that injury, and then that's basically all you hear about him in that season from my research, at least.
No, you're right. He never came back, so it was bad enough he had to have surgery, and because it's a shorter season, only 10 weeks.
What was the injury?
So he tore some ligaments and tendons in his hand and finger. And it was kind of one of those situations where they had to, I think, kind of go in and surgically open it up and sort of repair it. And then he had to have a cast on. And it was on his, I can't remember. I think it was on his left hand. So not his throwing hand, but, still it was kind of one of those things that it was enough that because of the shortness of the season, he wasn't going to be able to come back in time. And then obviously Alex Magoo just went supernova when he came in. And so at that point, Jamar didn't really need to come back. There was no point in risking aggravating the injury or something like that. So excuse me.
So you're good. That's why I drink that water, dude. That gets me too. You're good, man. Take what you need. You're fine.
You can tell I've been talking too much.
Yeah, it's 2 days of it'll get you. Once you start going on 2-hour lives, it really does exhaust you after about an hour. I know things start kind of get questionable where you got to think about what you're saying a little harder. But you sound good, man. I appreciate your takes. We got one more question. And
Let's
if you
do
can
it.
push through it, cool. If not, no worries.
I'm good.
So who does Luke have winning in Arlington 330-24? I love this move, having champ versus champ.
Yeah, it's tough because there's been so much roster change this offseason because of the merger. So, we had the dispersal drafts, and then we had the super draft, and now we have free agency. So it's one thing to compare both teams, right? 2023 Renegades, 2023 Stallions. But that's not necessarily what you're getting, right? When these two teams play on March 30th. I think it's going to be a great game. I think, the Stallions are really known for their offense and for what they were able to do last year. Again, especially with Alex Magoo and some of the weapons they had around him. And I think, Arlington for most of the season was really known for their defense. So I think it is kind of, strength versus strength kind of type situation. I'm going to have to go with the Stallions, of course.
Well, that's your team. I wouldn't expect nothing less, to be honest.
And part of that is because, honestly, in 2022, after we won the championship, when we were heading into 2023, I kind of got a little nervous just because I saw what all the other teams were doing and the way that they were able to add new guys and sort of build their rosters. And I was like, I don't know if we're that much better anymore than these other teams. And I was especially nervous about the Breakers. They added McLeod Bethel Thompson from the CFL, who was a big name quarterback, really experienced, new coach and some other good new players. And they were close to beating us in 2022. So I was like, man, this might kind of push them over the edge where, we might not be top dogs anymore. And actually at the beginning of the year, we lost to them. They started off the season 4-0 and we kind of we struggled a little bit at the beginning of the year. But as the season went on, it was just very clear that the Stallions were still kind of head and shoulders above everybody else. And I think that's just a credit to Skip Holtz, to our general manager, Zach Potter, to the core on the team that they've sort of built. That's still there. And all those pieces are still there. Understood. So as long as all those pieces are still there, I just can't bet against the Stallions, and that's nothing to take away from the Renegades because I love Luis Perez, obviously, us going back to, how he opened the show, the Birmingham Iron, he's my guy. So it's hard for me to bet against him. And obviously Bob Stoops is a legendary coach, and they've got an incredible defense. And like with all these things that are happening this offseason, like these teams are only getting better. But I know what the Stallions have been able to build over the last 2 years. And I think one way that I do think the Stallions have a sort of a leg up on a lot of other teams is I think I could be. Let me think before I say this. No, I'm actually right. I'm right about this. So the Stallions are the only team that are going into their third season with like the same coach and system, right? Like we've got some other teams like the Panthers and the what are now the Roughnecks that are going into a third year, but they've had new coaches. They've had coaching changes. Like they haven't had this.
You say that you mean the USFL division, correct? Or do you mean the whole? Okay. I just didn't know if you meant as a whole.
Yeah. No, just in terms of the USFL division. I mean, obviously with the XFL side, you've got, I guess you could say, sort of some of these teams are going into a third year, but it's still kind of not quite the same as what the Stallions have, because the Stallions, if you look at both conferences, right, are the only team with 3 consecutive seasons where they're the same coach, same system, same core group of guys. Obviously, like, Bob Stoops was with the Renegades in 2020. This will be his 3rd season with them, but obviously there's a big difference between the 2020 roster and the 2023 roster. And, the 2020 team didn't even get a full season in and all those kinds of factors, right? Like they had Landry Jones, right? Like where is he now? So, whereas like the Stallions, like our starting quarterback in 2024 is going to be the guy that led us to the championship in 2022. Our starting running back in 2024 is going to be the guy that started both of the last 2 seasons for us and won a championship, right? Like we have Victor Bolden coming back from 2022, who was like the MVP championship, but we also have Deion Kane, who was the MVP in the championship in 2023. And that's just the offensive side of the ball. We have our entire offensive line back from this past season. Most of our defensive players back. There's been a little bit more of an overhaul in the defense because that's been a little bit more of a weakness of ours. So I think they've really tried to strengthen that area. But all that to say, I mean, I think the Stallions have a leg up on everyone just with that sort of continuity that no other team on either conference has quite that same degree of continuity, whether it be because of coaching changes, the merger, the XFL stopping and starting, so when you take all that into account, I certainly don't think it's going to be a blowout or anything like that. I think it's going to be a great game. And there's a lot of unknown, right? Because like these are 2 different teams from 2 different leagues, and it's just hard to say. But I think the level of play is pretty similar. I mean, obviously a lot of the guys that were in the USFL in 2022 went over to the XFL in 2023. And so there's enough kind of overlap there that I think it's going to be fairly similar in ways. And again, given the Stallions kind of continuity and sort of having that 3rd year, I think that gives them there. It's almost like you're running a race, right? But they got to get a little bit of a head start. And so, I think, but the game's in Arlington, right? Like that'll be the Stallions, the first year they never had to play on the road until the postseason. And then last year they had to play on the road some, but still not as much as some of these other teams have. So like the living in Arlington, playing in Arlington, like that's all going to be new for them. So there'll be some things that are different, right? That's not necessarily the same as the past 2 years. So you really never know what'll happen, especially with the game of football. But if I'm not really a betting man, but if I was, I can't bet against the Stallions.
I mean, logically, it makes total sense. I'll go right there with you because a lot of positions were changed, or people that were playing for those Renegades are not there anymore. That were some key pieces. But we also have that QB battle. You've got completely different quarterbacks in Arlington. It's hard to really gauge what they're going to do. Whereas with the Stallions, you can kind of already see the history there and what they may unfold with the guys that's already familiar with the offense. A lot of people are saying Luis Perez trades is what I'm hearing. He's going to be traded or something like that. And it makes sense. But then again, why would you trade your seasoned veteran to give somebody a chance that you're not sure of? And Stoops knows what he's doing. If there's one guy that I can say confidently, it's definitely him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's hard to question. Well, I'll put it this way. It's tempting to question what they're doing. Because, when you have Luis Perez, it's like you would think you've got your guy, But I like Holton Ayers a lot, who they brought in. I mean, he was a guy that at one point I was like, if the Stallions need a backup or a third string, like that's a guy I would like for us to bring in. So I mean, I think with some of the other, and then Lindsey Scott, I mean, he like put up just like insane numbers in college and stuff. So it's like, I mean, I think whoever they have at quarterback, it's hard for me to imagine it's not going to be Perez, especially week 1. But I mean, whoever they have is like, it's going to be a good player. I think it's just some questions. Like my question is, I think again, like on the Stallions side, we kind of know what to expect a little bit more. I think they're going to hit the ground a little bit running. I think there's more questions in Arlington.
Agreed.
But
Agreed.
again, there's no doubt that they've got good players and good coaching. Yeah. So certainly can't count them out.
It'll be a good game to start it off. And I'm excited for that. And, there's something I haven't really shared with my people is the 30th is actually my birthday. So
nice.
It's awesome that the season's going to kick off, on my birthday. I mean, it feels like this is the year, we'll see what happens exactly though.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that'll be fun. That's, it's a good thing. It's not like, your girlfriend or spouse's birthday or something like that.
You're right.
Like my wife's birthday is really close to March 30th, but it's not on March 30th, thankfully. So I'll be able to go to the game and all that kind of thing. But if it was my birthday, then that would be even better because then I could just be like, well, this is what I want to do, and nobody can question me. So that'll be a fun way to celebrate.
No doubt. Looking forward to it. Oh, Pat Ruffino's checking in. What's up, Pat? How you doing, man?
Pat's the man.
He is the man.
I love how he mentioned that Landry Jones is a construction manager. I don't know if that's true or not, but like it fits the bill. like I could see it.
I thought you were talking about like on an offense.
Yeah. He said he's a construction manager and he owns a D1, like I guess one of those gyms. So like, I do remember him because like some people mentioned, like Pat mentioned, like he was like, the big signing and supposed to be the face of the league in 2020. And then like that did not quite work out how we thought it might. But
old Dallas Renegades.
About these leagues, yeah, you never really know the guys that you maybe like we talked about this at one point earlier, but that sometimes the guys you think are that guy's definitely going to go in and dominate. It's not necessarily the case, and some guys emerge that you really never expect to. So
yes sir. Well, Luke, I appreciate your time, dude. I got you out of here in under 2 hours, so
there you go. A couple minutes to spare.
It's been a good conversation, man. I look forward to catching up with you again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Appreciate your opinions, your knowledge, and yeah, man, anytime you want to come on, you let me know. You're always welcome back. Seriously.
Sounds great.
I've got your stuff rolling at the bottom. I'll stick it all in the notes like I always do. Is there anywhere else people should be looking for you, or do you want to plug something before you roll out?
No, I think that's pretty much it right now. I'm just mostly, like I said earlier, on Twitter. So Luke Miller, PFN. I do for Pro Football Newsroom. If you go to, just Google Pro Football Newsroom or pfnewsroom.com, I do write articles, that show up on there that are, again, kind of related to the Stallions. Then we've got other stuff on there as well. And we mentioned it earlier, but we've got a new show we're trying out Monday nights. We're calling it Around the UFL. So it's like 7 of us, and it's kind of crazy and, half comedic, half serious UFL talk. So, if that's your sort of cup of tea, you can always check that out. But we'll see. I've got some other ideas, some other things that are maybe be in the works coming down the line. But if you follow me on Twitter, you'll be up with all those things. So
for sure. Thanks again, Luke. You let me know if you need anything or if you ever want to come back, man. Be safe, and hopefully we'll get to catch up at a game this season.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. All right. Thanks, man.
Appreciate you, sir.
Adios.
All right. Thank you, Luke, man. Good show. Good conversation. Been waiting to speak with him for probably about a month, and I'm glad we could finally do it. Very down-to-earth guy. Really loves his content, USFL content, and now UFL content. And if there's one I would recommend to you guys, it's really him. He really does a good job socially. He's not trying to troll. He's not trying to get clout. He's just sharing information and doing things that he loves, and what he loves, he presents. So super cool guy. Appreciate you, Luke. All right, before we wrap it up, we have the new show, and this is what I've been waiting on. This would be my last rebrand of the season, I hope. The show isn't going to change too much. I'm going to change a lot of things. We're going to try to make it look a little more professional as we go. and try to do things a little better in terms of just showmanship and graphics and such. But what I really wanted to convey when I did this switch is, this is the XFL Insider Podcast, and I put Insider on there. And by an insider, I didn't mean that I was the insider. That we were. I basically just meant that we were getting inside XFL, and we're going to discuss it, hash it out, and then display this information for everyone to see. It's been such a pleasure. I've had so many guests that are experts in their field, whether it's football, like our football, or another football, or players, and it's been such a good time. And I really appreciate everyone that's watched and partaken in the show and the festivities and just supporting us and the team. Rounding out what I'm saying is I really want to make this more of a team project. I want us all to come together to be insiders. I want everybody to have some kind of hand in this pot so that we're getting the best news and shows that we can possibly get. And so, without further ado, I'm going to play you my little video and see what you think. All right, guys. So that's it. It's the UFL Insiders Podcast. We're going to switch it up a little bit. Like I said, I want everyone to be an insider. It doesn't matter if you're a fan, an expert, a writer, a player, a coach. Like, let's get on board and let's get this thing moving. It never was about me with this show, and that's something I really want to highlight. It's about everyone else, and that's what I want to stick to. So keep watching, keep following. We're going to keep bringing people on, guests, experts, and really center in on this UFL content. I've separated the interview portions from this show so that I can interview individuals that aren't related to UFL, and it gives them the spotlight they need. So now that we can really focus on this UFL stuff, and that's kind of what I want to roll with. I hope you like it, guys, and check in next week for next week's episode. We'll have Mark Perry on from UFL News Hub, and we're going to have a new intro. I'll have some new things going, and it should be a change of pace. Going to try to shorten the episodes up, but honestly, it's kind of hard sometimes. We get these conversations going, and I don't want to stop, just like tonight with Luke. I mean, we spent 40, 50 minutes just talking about him and kind of getting to know him before we got into the subject matter, so that when he's speaking, you can really understand what he's talking about and his point of view. So once again, appreciate everyone. This will be the last episode of the XFL Insider Podcast. I will not be doing any more. We will now be rebranding to the UFL Insiders Podcast. Great team behind me, great partners with this website. We got some really good things going, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Once I can finally get some time to sit down, we're going to make a official statement about our partners and our team and everything. But it's such a pleasure to have everyone organized here and like doing what they love, man. It's not about clout. It's not about money, because no one's getting paid from this team. Nobody, not me. I'm spending money. It's about the league. It's about spring football. It's about being a fan and loving football and loving every aspect of it, regardless if you agree or not. I'm excited and look forward to it. I know we'll have Mark Perry on, and then, honestly, I quit doing monthly schedules because people were kind of stealing my guests. So just check in 2 to 3 days prior to each Tuesday. Should have a show rolling every Tuesday from now on, unless something comes up. As far as the interview series, that's going to probably be a Thursday night show. I may switch that between, depending on who I'm interviewing and when they need to actually, get on live. But yeah, man, appreciate all you guys for listening and following. This is Matthew signing out of the last XFL Insider Podcast episode. It's been a pleasure. I've grown. I've done things I never thought I'd do. I've seen things I never thought I'd seen, and we're just getting started. This is the year, and I'm very confident in that. So grab the reins, guys, and hold on, because I promise we're coming, and we're going to show up. Thank you all for listening and supporting. We'll see you all next week. Mark Perry, UFL News Hub. Thank you.